Hello everyone, welcome to From the Star Wars Library, where Star Wars is in print, the Force is with the readers, and we returned in November of 1983 for a momentous occasion in Star Wars publishing. I'm your host, Nathan P. Butler. Up until this point, we've been keeping tabs on, among other things, the Marvel series. We reached issue number 80, we finished up all of the different annuals, we finished out the Return of the Jedi miniseries. At this point, all we have left are issues 81 through 107, and it's 81 that's our focus this time around. We're used to thinking a lot of times as the birth of the modern expanded universe, of the post-Return of the Jedi Star Wars continuity, as something that began in either June of 1991 with Heir to the Empire. This is my original copy of Heir to the Empire here. This one, in this case, signed by Timothy Zahn there. We think it either began here, or we think it began in the pages of Dark Empire number 1 in December of 1991, when Star Wars returned to comics. This particular one is signed by, where we have there, Tom Veitch up there, and then Dave Dorman down here in the corner, the cover artist here. But this was not the first attempt to do post-Return of the Jedi Star Wars EU in comic form, or in comics or novels, the way we tend to think of as the mainstream two outlets for the Star Wars Expanded Universe medium. Also, we found in issue number 4 of Dark Empire that Boba Fett had returned. We had ended issue number 3 with, "A Mr. Fett to see you, sir. A Mr. Fett. A Mr. Fett." Only to wind up having him finally show up in the first panel of the first page of Dark Empire number 4 back in 1992. However, that was not Boba Fett's first reappearance in a post-Return of the Jedi EU, nor were either of those the first attempt at post-Return of the Jedi Expanded Universe stories. That honor belongs to Marvel Comics. So the issue we're looking at this time is issue number 81, entitled Jawas of Doom, with kind of a film-style poster kind of cover there. Very nice cover. Much nicer, frankly, than the story honestly deserves. You can find this these days in the pages of issue number 4 of Classic Star Wars A Long Time Ago, the Prestige Format Edition. This is the one that also includes The Search Begins, Death in the City of Bone, and The Big Khan, making this the only post-Return of the Jedi story in it. One of only a few of those that actually did wind up getting reprinted in that series. And of course, you can find this as one of the last stories in Star Wars Omnibus A Long Time Ago, Volume 4, more recently, from Dark Horse Comics. Now, the story seems to pick up right after the Battle of Endor, though thanks to the novel Truce we know that can't possibly be the case. It says, in a brief conversation bit, we had Lando asking, "Hey Luke, Wedge, do these Ewoks know how to throw a party, or do they?" And it continues on talking about blowing up the Death Star and so forth, which makes it sound as though it's the party from the Death Star's destruction, the party we see at the end of Return of the Jedi. Only now we know that Truce happens the day after the Death Star 2 is destroyed. They go on that mission. Presumably this is them coming back, maybe celebrating from that victory, and then it picks up from there very shortly thereafter. At this point, Han is, as he says, back in circulation, but he's kind of spinning his wheels, losing almost a year, 9 months we now know, to being in Carbonite has kind of screwed up some of his situations. So, Jabba the Hutt is dead, Boba Fett is presumably gone, so, there's no worry about the bounty at this point, but he needs to get back into circulation, get some money back. In fact, we actually meet him at the beginning of the issue with his, "Hey, it's me," kind of thing going on, trying to bum money off of another rebel. So they decide, that is, Han, with the help of Leia and R2-D2, because Chewbacca's going to stay, he's commiserating with the Ewoks at this point. They decide, or I guess with the Ewoks and with Pliff, they go off to Tatooine. And the goal is to go to where Han has stashed some money that he was saving up to eventually be able to pay back Jabba the Hutt. They'll get his money back out, and all will be well. Unfortunately, they get there, and the fact that Han's been in Carbonite has basically caused his account to be frozen. No pun intended. So even though he's back out, they assume he's out of circulation. He can't get access to those accounts. They need R2-D2 to help break into the accounts, or at least tell the computer he really is alive so we can have access. Problem is, by the time they get back, R2-D2 has been grabbed by a sandcrawler. That's right, the Jawas. Only the Jawas have also picked up something else fairly interesting recently. That in the form of a body what they think of as a droid. We see some brief little flashback type things here. Apparently, Boba Fett gets hit, falls into the Sarlacc pit. The Sarlacc then has indigestion and basically belches or pukes. It's like belch, but he's got some stuff on him back out, and he winds up landing along the edge, only to wind up covered up by sand and muck and such. And thinking he might be a droid, the Jawas salvage him basically and stick him aboard their sandcrawler, the same one that has now picked up R2-D2. Han and Leia go racing after the sandcrawler, trying to save R2-D2, not realizing that Boba Fett, who has amnesia, or at least has little current memory, is also on board. Eventually, Han winds up having to go inside to be able to save R2-D2. He gets in there, he recognizes Boba Fett, just saying Boba Fett's name doesn't jog his memory enough, and it gets to the point where the sandcrawler is about to go into the Sarlacc pit, and basically, Han, he bites down on it, he does that hero thing, kind of hides his revulsion and such, and reaches down to try to save Boba Fett from falling back into the Sarlacc inside the sandcrawler. Only as soon as Leia yells out, "Han, jump! Han!" it causes Boba Fett to go click, Han Solo, and sure enough, he pulls a blaster on Han, even when Han is trying to save his life. Han has to move away, and boom, the sandcrawler goes back into the Sarlacc pit, bearing Boba Fett with it. Which basically means that Boba Fett went into the Sarlacc, escaped the Sarlacc, went into the Sarlacc, and will eventually escape the Sarlacc, again, as we see in subsequent EU stories. It's an odd one, and the fact that the Marvel series was not considered in continuity whenever the EU was relaunched back in 1991 meant that for a while there was only that one escape story. Of course, in the 80s, there was only one escape story also, just a different one. Now the Marvel stuff is brought back in, now what we're dealing with is essentially two different escape stories that now happen somewhat back to back. And it makes for some weirdness, but the entire story of how Boba Fett gets resurrected and how many times that they considered it and didn't, and what does Lucas say about it versus what do the films say about it, and, is he allowing it or not allowing it, and all that kind of stuff. It's pretty convoluted over a long period of time. So it's kind of interesting to see here that the convolution actually began pretty early as far as EU goes, because we had this very contrived way of bringing him back only to dump him back into the Sarlacc pit and sort of bring things right back to square one again for Boba Fett. It makes for an odd tale. Another one by Mary Jo Duffy with art by Ron Friends. Begs the question, of course, is this an essential read? I'm going to have to say no on this one. While this is the first post-Return of the Jedi story ever produced in comics, right? First one for Marvel. The novels didn't dare go this far. At this point, the Del Rey novels did one set between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, and then everything else has been pre-A New Hope up to this point, except for the film novelizations. We're pretty much in a position where the comics were the only ones going into this territory, and it will continue to do so for the most part, minus a few flashback issues and such, all the way up through issue number 107. So from the standpoint of being a landmark moment in Star Wars history, it's awesome to finally get to Jawas of Doom. It is post-Return of the Jedi EU stuff. Is it a good story, though? No, not really. And do we need to see Boba Fett come out of the Sarlacc and get knocked back into it before we see him get out of it for the time where he stays out? No, not really. So I would say it is not an essential read for either Marvel or modern readers, especially since we don't wind up seeing Boba Fett again in this series either. At this point, from Marvel's standpoint, he's stuck. With that, we'll wrap up this episode. Thank you for watching, and may the Force be with the readers.